Hello, it's Brian Keene, and welcome back to Secret Histories. In our last episode, dealing with 4x4, I mentioned that the next book we'd be talking about was The Rising, but I was wrong. So mark it on your calendars. Brian Keene was wrong, something that rarely happens, because I forgot all about Talking Smack. Talking Smack is an audiobook. It was only ever released on CD. However, since it is long, long out of print, and since those master tapes are long gone, I guess it was earlier this year or last year, I made it available on both Patreon and YouTube. So if you subscribe to me on Patreon or YouTube, go poking around and you should be able to find Talking Smack in its entirety. This CD came out in 2002. It was published by Medium Rare Books, and it bridges the gap between my early insurrectionist indie career and what would become my mainstream career with the success of The Rising. I pulled out a second copy of the CD so that I could show it to you without having to fumble around with one hand, etc. So let's look at the second jewel case. The table of contents were Cottonamash, Wild Kingdom, and the Revolution Happened While You Were Sleeping, a summoning spell. Cottonamash was one of the more popular stories from No Rest for the Wicked. It features the first appearance of Perturabo, one of the 13, most recently seen in Splintered, the Labyrinth Book 3. Second story was Wild Kingdom. We talked about that in the last video. That was a story that, Jeff Cooper and I had to write something together for 4x4. And at the time, I was still working on fine-tuning The Rising. The Rising wasn't even called The Rising at that point. It was still called More Than Infinity. And Richard Lehman had made some suggestions to me, and I was fine-tuning based on his input. And, I had sent Koopa a partial of a chapter that would later become a chapter in The Rising, but we turned it into Wild Kingdom. And of course, if you compare the short story with that chapter in The Rising, sure, there are similarities, but there's also a lot of differences. So it was the reader's first hint, really, of the Labyrinth mythos, the key being, that there are alternate realities and string theory and eternal return and everything that I'm known for. And of course, the third story, The Revolution Happened While You Were Sleeping, a summoning spell, isn't really a story at all. It's sort of a beat poem, and it's also a manifesto. Keep in mind that my generation of writers, we began getting published as horror died off. The great 90s crash, the collapse of Zebra Books and Del Abyss and everybody going out of business and writers going and getting jobs in factories and elsewhere. That was when we started getting published, was in the aftermath of all that, in the ashes. And, our stated intention as a group was to not only build horror fiction back up again, get it back into bookstores, but make it more popular than it had ever been, and make sure that didn't happen again. And The Revolution Happened While You Were Sleeping basically promises that. What it does is, in its 8-minute delivery time, it runs through the entire history of horror fiction, going back to Primitive Man and the Pictographs, and ending with the Splatterpunks. And then the last verse is about us coming in. It is absolutely 100% inspired by Alan Moore's spoken word CDs. If you haven't heard any of those, I encourage you to seek them out. Really, really good stuff. I think he did 3 of them. What else do we know from the back of the jewel case? This photo was taken at World Horror Convention, and I was, in fact, reading Wild Kingdom. Let's see here. That is Big Joe Maynard. This was his first year of serving as my, serving sounds wrong, his first year in my employ as my bodyguard, my personal assistant, and my driver. Joe did all those things. I lived on the road in these years, selling books to whoever would buy them, reading and giving Q&As wherever people would have me. And Joe was constantly with me. He was also very good at answering my email, which is probably something I could use these days. Who else can we see here on the back? There is a very young Weston Oaks, Yvonne Navarro. This is the first year they started dating, actually. This was the first convention where they sort of made their relationship public. Who else do we have back here? I recognize Ryan Harding right there. Baby-faced Ryan Harding. Paul Melnizik, good Central PA author. Used to write horror. These days he does fantasy. But yeah, that's the back of the jewel case. Then we get into the CD itself. And again, let me put this here. So up here we have, that's Bill Barnett. He was an old friend. And the rest of these guys are from the band Power Plant, which was a big growly metal, death metal band in New Jersey. The lead singer, lead guitarist was in fact engaged to Mary Sangiovanni at the time. This is me and Rain Graves. This was taken earlier that year after we lost a gross out contest. The two of us had a performance. I believe Kelly Lehman performed with us, and much to our chagrin, we lost. Got a lot of photos of me and Rain, but this has always probably been my favorite. This, of course, was taken from that photo on the back of the jewel case. It's my friend Megan, and right here we have Mary Sangiovanni, back when she was still engaged to one of those guys. That's a sex doll. That's a long story. Anyway, that's the CD, and then of course you get into the CD booklet itself. There we have the awesome cover. Here we have the credits again. I dedicated this one to my dear friend Gina Mitchell. These days she's known as Regina Mitchell Garza. Has several books out. You should definitely check her stuff out if you haven't. Gina's been there since the beginning. And yeah, this one was dedicated to her. Recorded and engineered by myself and James Newman. Now, we're going to get back to that in a moment. Mixed by John Turi at Medium Rare Studios. He did no such fucking thing. And we're going to get back to that in a moment as well. I had even thanked Mary's fiance's band in the acknowledgments. Big Joe mentioned there, Joe GPS Maynard. That was before he had the name Big Joe. Dean Koontz's dog, because, well, it's a long story. But yeah, I guess we can tell that story. One time, Coop and I were entrusted with walking Dean Koontz's dog around Southern California. If you know anything about Dean Koontz, if you've ever read a Dean Koontz novel, you know that Dean is very serious about his dogs. So it was a big fucking deal for us to be able to walk his dog. Coop and I did what any two young men in that situation might try to do. We tried to pick up girls in Southern California with Dean Koontz's dog. Walk down the sidewalk. Girl goes by. Hey, you know who we got here? The dog from Watchers. What we forgot was that nobody in LA actually fucking reads books, so nobody knew what we were talking about. That's just a little blurb from The Revolution Happened While You Were Sleeping. Here's something I had forgotten all about. I used to do this in my early books. I used to keep score. It used to say, Keene 1, Anonymous Assholes 0, whatever. Except by this point in my career, I had unmasked those detractors online, and this was my 5th publication. There were 3 previous incarnations of No Rest, which we covered 4x4, and now this. I don't know exactly when I stopped putting the score count in my books. It must have been during the leisure era. When we get to the Rising, we'll find out. I'd actually forgotten all about that. Jesus, I was just young and full of piss and vinegar. I was an angry young man. And there's nothing wrong with being an angry young man. What you don't want to be is an angry old man. I often think of Harlan Ellison when I say that, or perhaps more recently, Tom Monteleone. I have fondness for talking smack. It ended poorly. Turned out Medium Rare Books was, I don't want to call the guy a scam artist, but he imploded. He went out owing a lot of people money. There is a rumor and allegations that a year later, at a World Horror Convention, when he owed so many people money and everyone knew they weren't going to get paid, and he showed up and had a table in the vendor room, and then he participated in the gross out contest wearing a stork penis thong and nothing else. Yes, a thong shaped like a stork over his penis and nothing else. Now all that is factual, but there are allegations that several authors broke into the dealer's room overnight, took merchandise, and distributed among themselves and the other medium rare authors with the agreement of, we all agree none of us are going to get paid. We never got our contributor copies. These are our contributor copies. And that's it. I cannot speak to those allegations. I can't speak to any of that. But that's the rumor I've heard over the years. Maybe if the Hail Satan TV series ever actually gets filmed, it'll delve into that. I don't know. Anyway, I have a lot of fond memories of talking smack. It was, in fact, all recorded live. And then we fucked up the master tapes, so we had to re-record them. Wild Kingdom and The Revolution Happened While You Were Sleeping were both recorded at horror conventions. Caught in a Mosh was recorded at a party in New Jersey in the living room of Megan, one of the girls in that picture. So Newman and I had to re-record them, where, I went into a studio and just laid down the tracks by myself. And then Newman mixed in crowd sounds, sort of like Guns N' Roses did with Live Like a Suicide. But yeah, this makes me think of my friends. That CD, and particularly this image here on the back, makes me think of my friends. It makes me think of good times. It makes me think of when we were young and the world was our oyster and we could fucking do anything. And we decided that the fucking thing we wanted to do was we wanted to be fucking horror writers. Not only did we want to be fucking horror writers, we wanted to take over this genre. And sure enough, we did. And the beginning of that story will be the subject of our next video when we go to 2003, 2004, and the publication of a little zombie novel called The Rising. Thanks for watching. Peace.